The blood-red sun dipped below the jagged mountains as Charlotte Hayes pressed her face against the cold glass of her bedroom window, watching her father down below, negotiating with a stranger whose silver pocket watch glinted in the fading light. She didn't know it yet, but by morning she would be gone from the only home she'd ever known. The year was 1878, and life in the dusty town of Silverwood, Arizona Territory, had never been kind to 18-year-old Charlotte. Her mother had died giving birth to a stillborn brother when Charlotte was just 12, leaving her alone with her father, Vernon Hayes, a man who had once been gentle but whom grief and whiskey had transformed into someone she barely recognized. Silverwood had sprung up like many frontier towns during the silver rush of the early 1870s, but the mines had begun to dry up, and with them, her father's prospects. The drought that summer had been merciless, withering what little crop they had managed to coax from the unforgiving soil of their small farm outside town. She stepped back from the window when her father glanced up, as though he could sense her watching. The stranger with him was tall and lean, dressed in fine clothes that marked him as a city man, not one of the usual rough-hewn traders or desperate miners who passed through. His black coat was immaculate, his boots polished to a shine that seemed out of place in their dusty yard. Charlotte turned away, braiding her chestnut hair before bed. She had no way of knowing that the whispers exchanged between her father and the stranger would change everything. The dawn broke harsh and bright, streaming through the thin curtains. Charlotte was already awake, having slept fitfully. She dressed in her best though threadbare dress, a pale blue cotton that her mother had sewn years ago. Something in her father's demeanor the previous evening had left her uneasy. When she entered the kitchen, Vernon Hayes sat at the table, a leather pouch before him, his fingers nervously tapping against the scarred wood. "Pa," she said softly. He wouldn't meet her eyes. "Pack your things, Charlotte, only what you can carry in one bag." "What? Why?" Her heart began to race. "You're leaving with Mr. Richmond. He's a businessman from San Francisco. He needs a housekeeper, and I've arranged for you to go with him." The blood drained from Charlotte's face. "You've what?" Vernon finally looked up, his bloodshot eyes holding a mixture of shame and resolve. "It's done. He's paid good money, more than we'd see in 3 years of farming this God-forsaken land." "Paid you? You sold me." The words came out in a horrified whisper. "Don't be dramatic. I've secured you a position, a future. There's nothing here for you, Charlotte, nothing but dust and poverty. This is my home." Her voice rose, panic setting in. Vernon slammed his fist on the table, making her jump. "This ain't a home anymore. It's a grave, and I won't see you buried in it. Now pack your things. He'll be here at noon." Charlotte fled to her room, tears blurring her vision. She moved mechanically, folding her few possessions into a small carpet bag. Her mother's silver hairbrush, a tattered book of poetry, 2 dresses, undergarments, and the small wooden horse her father had carved for her 10th birthday, back when he was still capable of kindness. As she packed, her mind raced. Who was this Mr. Richmond? What did he truly want with her? Housekeeper could mean many things to a man willing to buy a young woman. The stories she'd heard of girls lured to cities with promises of respectable work, only to end up in brothels, chilled her to the bone. At precisely noon, a gleaming black carriage pulled up outside their home. Charlotte stood in the doorway, carpetbag clutched in white-knuckled hands, as the stranger from the previous evening approached. Up close, she could see he was older than she'd initially thought, perhaps 40, with silver threading through his dark hair at the temples. His eyes were cold as they assessed her, like a man examining livestock. "Miss Hayes," he said with a slight bow. "Edgar Richmond. I trust you're ready to depart." Charlotte looked to her father, hoping against hope that he would change his mind, but Vernon Hayes stared at the ground, the pouch of money clutched tightly in his fist. Her voice caught. I don't want to go. Richmond's smile didn't reach his eyes. I'm afraid that decision isn't yours to make, my dear. Your father and I have come to an arrangement. The papers are signed. Papers? She whispered. A contract of indenture. 7 years of service to repay your father's debts. Quite legal, I assure you. Vernon finally spoke, his voice gruff. It's for the best, Charlotte. Mr. Richmond is a respectable businessman. You'll have food, clothes, shelter more than I can provide. Please, Pa, she begged, tears streaming down her face. Don't do this. But her father turned away, shoulders hunched, and walked back into the house without another word. Richmond's hand clamped around her upper arm. Come along, Miss Hayes. We have a long journey ahead. As the carriage pulled away, Charlotte pressed her face against the window, watching her childhood home grow smaller until it disappeared around a bend in the road. Only then did she allow herself to truly weep. Miles away, on the outskirts of Silverwood, a tall figure stood in the doorway of the livery stable. Kade Powell wiped sweat from his brow as he watched the elegant black carriage roll through town. At 25, Kade had seen enough of life to recognize when something didn't sit right. He'd known Vernon Hayes for years, a broken man who'd fallen deeper into the bottle since losing his wife, but never a man Kade would have expected to do what the whispers around town suggested. You hear about Hayes selling off his daughter to that fancy feller from California. Asked Tom Jenkins, the aging blacksmith, as he hammered at a horseshoe. Kade frowned. That true, not just talk. Tom spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. Saw it with my own eyes. The man paid him in gold. Poor girl was crying something fierce as they rode off. Charlotte's just a kid, Kade muttered. 18 now, I reckon. Old enough to be married off, but selling her like that. Tom shook his head. Ain't right. Kade had known Charlotte since she was a skinny girl with braids and scraped knees. He'd watched her grow into a young woman with quiet dignity despite her circumstances. They weren't close. He kept mostly to himself since returning from the war, but he'd tipped his hat when they passed in town. Sometimes carried flour sacks to her wagon when he saw her struggling. Who's the buyer? Kade asked, his voice deceptively calm. Calls himself Richmond. Fancy suit, talks like he's got a mouthful of marbles. Said he runs some kind of business in San Francisco. Kade knew what kind of businessmen like that were likely to run. He'd seen too many young women lured or sold into lives that broke them, body and soul. Which way were they headed? Tom looked up, eyes narrowing. Now don't you go getting any ideas, Powell. That man's got money and connections. You're just a cowhand with a talent for breaking horses. Kade was already moving toward the stall where his stallion, Diablo, stood. The big black horse had seen him through the war and every trial since. I'm just curious, Tom. That's all. But Tom Jenkins had known Kade Powell since he was a boy. He recognized the set of the younger man's jaw, the flint in his eyes. West, toward California, said something about catching the train at Flagstaff. Kade nodded once, his decision made. By dusk, he had gathered his few possessions, along with provisions for the journey. He strapped his Winchester rifle to his saddle and checked the revolver at his hip. As an afterthought, he rode to the Hayes farm, finding Vernon sitting on his porch, staring into the gathering darkness, a half-empty bottle of whiskey beside him. "Evening, Hayes," Kade called, not bothering to dismount. Vernon squinted up at him. "What do you want, Powell? Wondering if you might want to reconsider the deal you made today." Vernon's laugh was bitter. "Come to judge me, have you, like the rest of them? That money's keeping me from losing everything. That money bought your daughter." Vernon lurched to his feet, swaying slightly. "She's got a position, a future. Better than wasting away here with a worthless drunk for a father. You know what kind of position Richmond has in mind. He's a businessman, respectable. But doubt flickered across Vernon's haggard face. Kade leaned forward in his saddle. If you believe that, you're a bigger fool than I took you for. Vernon's shoulders sagged. What does it matter now? They're gone. Contracts signed. Where was he taking her exactly? San Francisco has some big house there. Vernon hesitated. He said she'd be a companion to his sister. Kade's laugh was humorless. And you believed that? Vernon looked away. What choice did I have? The bank's taking the farm. We're 3 months behind on payments. There's always a choice, Hayes. Kade turned Diablo toward the road. Always. Where are you going? Vernon called after him. To fix your mistake, Kade answered without looking back. As Charlotte endured her second day of travel in Richmond's carriage, the world she knew fell away with each turning of the wheels. They had passed through Flagstaff the previous evening, staying at a hotel where Richmond secured 2 rooms, though he made it clear the arrangement was temporary, until we reach a more private setting. His words sent shivers down her spine. So far, he had not touched her beyond guiding her with a firm hand on her back or arm, but his eyes lingered in ways that made her skin crawl. We'll reach Williams by nightfall, Richmond announced, breaking the tense silence inside the carriage. From there, we'll take the train to California. Charlotte gathered her courage. Mr. Richmond, what exactly will my duties entail once we reach San Francisco? His thin smile made her stomach clench. You're a pretty young thing, Miss Hayes, prettier than your father let on. I run an establishment that caters to gentlemen of taste and means. You'll entertain my guests, make them feel welcome. The meaning behind his carefully chosen words became horrifyingly clear. I won't do that, she whispered. Richmond's smile vanished. You don't have a choice, my dear. Your father signed you over to me for 7 years. 7 years during which you'll do exactly as you're told. That can't be legal. The contract is quite binding. Indenture is perfectly legal in the territories, and should you attempt to run, I'll have the law on my side. You'd be arrested as a thief stealing yourself, essentially, from your rightful employer. Tears burned behind Charlotte's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give him the satisfaction. Instead, she turned to look out the window at the passing landscape, at the vast expanse of desert and mountains. Somewhere in that wilderness was freedom, if only she could find a way to reach it. Kade Powell rode hard through the day and into the night, stopping only to rest his horse and check for signs of the carriage's passage. He knew these trails well, having worked as a scout for the Army after the war. The main road to Flagstaff was clear enough, but he needed to make sure Richmond hadn't veered off onto a less traveled route. At a small trading post outside Flagstaff, Kade found his first solid lead. Black carriage, fancy city man, and a young woman looking like she'd been crying. Passed through yesterday afternoon, confirmed the grizzled shopkeeper. Heading for the Grand Canyon Railway, I reckon. Man was boasting about having a private car waiting. Kade nodded his thanks and purchased additional supplies. If Richmond was taking the train, Kade would need to push Diablo harder to catch up before they boarded. Once on the rails, they'd moved too quickly for him to follow on horseback. He rode through the night, guided by moonlight and determination. By dawn, he reached Williams, the small town that served as a gateway to the Grand Canyon and an important stop on the railway. He left Diablo at a livery stable with instructions to give the exhausted horse the best care, then made his way to the train station. The station master confirmed his fears. Private car left on the morning train about 2 hours ago. Gentleman and a young lady. Paid extra to connect directly to the Southern Pacific line at Needles. Kade's jaw tightened. When's the next train west? Not until tomorrow morning. Passenger service only runs once a day. I need to get to Needles today, Kade insisted, slapping a gold coin on the counter. The station master eyed the coin, then looked up at Kade's determined face. Well, there is a freight train leaving in an hour. Not supposed to take passengers, but the conductor might look the other way for the right price. Point me to him. An hour later, Kade was settled in the sparse caboose of a westbound freight train, having convinced the conductor that his urgent family matter was worth the risk of carrying an unofficial passenger. The freight train wouldn't move as quickly as the passenger service, but it would get him to Needles by nightfall, hopefully, before Richmond's connection to California departed. As the train clattered along the tracks, Kade cleaned his revolver and considered his options. Richmond was a wealthy man with connections. Even if Kade caught up to him, rescuing Charlotte wouldn't be as simple as confronting the man and demanding her release. He needed a plan, preferably one that wouldn't end with him swinging from a hangman's noose. Charlotte had never felt so alone in her life. The private train car was luxuriously appointed, with plush velvet seats and polished mahogany paneling, but it might as well have been a prison cell. Richmond had introduced her to the conductor as his ward, his hand possessively at her waist, silencing her with a warning glance whenever she opened her mouth to speak. Now, as the train rumbled westward, she sat by the window watching the landscape change from forests to desert. Richmond sat across from her, reading a newspaper and occasionally glancing at his pocket watch. "We'll change trains at Needles," he informed her. "The private car will be coupled to the Southern Pacific Line, and we'll be in San Francisco in 3 days' time." "And then?" she asked, her voice barely audible over the train's rhythm. Richmond folded his newspaper. "And then you'll begin your new life. My establishment, the Gilded Rose, caters to the elite of San Francisco society. You'll be trained in the art of conversation, dance, and other necessary skills." "I won't do it," Charlotte said with more conviction than she felt. Richmond sighed as if dealing with a petulant child. "Such dramatics. Many girls would be grateful for the opportunity. You'll have fine clothes, jewels, your own rooms. After your indenture is complete, you may even have saved enough to establish yourself independently." "As what?" "A fallen woman with no prospects." His eyes hardened. "As whatever you wish. But make no mistake, Miss Hayes, your fate is sealed. You can embrace it with grace or fight it at every turn. Only one of these paths leads to any measure of comfort." Charlotte turned away, refusing to let him see the desperation in her eyes. As the train slowed to take on water at a small depot, she caught sight of a freight train on a parallel track. For a fleeting moment, she considered throwing open the door and running, but to where? She had no money, no allies, and Richmond's warnings about the legality of her situation haunted her. Would the law truly side with him? The water stop was brief, and soon they were moving again, the desert landscape blurring as they picked up speed. Charlotte closed her eyes, a silent prayer on her lips for deliverance from the nightmare her life had become. Kade arrived in Needles as the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the dusty frontier town. The freight train had made good time, and the conductor informed him that the passenger train from Williams wouldn't arrive for another hour. "Southern Pacific connection to California leaves at midnight," the man added. "They usually hold it if the eastbound train is running late." Kade thanked him and made his way to the station, where he purchased a ticket to San Francisco. The clerk raised an eyebrow at his dusty appearance, but asked no questions when Kade placed the exact fare on the counter. With time to prepare, Kade found a general store still open and purchased a clean shirt and provisions for the journey. At a small cantina near the station, He ordered a meal and coffee, positioning himself where he could watch the platforms for Richmond's arrival. The passenger train from Williams pulled in with a screech of brakes and billowing steam. Kade watched as travelers disembarked, scanning each face. Finally, he spotted them, Richmond guiding Charlotte with a firm grip on her elbow, directing a porter to handle their luggage. Even from a distance, Kade could see the fear and resignation in Charlotte's posture. Her shoulders were hunched, head down, so different from the spirited girl he remembered. Something fierce and protective surged in his chest at the sight. He waited until they entered the station before following at a discreet distance. Richmond led Charlotte to a private waiting area reserved for first-class passengers, leaving her there while he spoke to the station master about their connecting train. It was the opportunity Kade had been waiting for. He approached Charlotte, who sat staring at her hands, unaware of his presence until his shadow fell across her. "Miss Hayes," he said softly. Charlotte's head jerked up, her eyes widening in disbelief. "Mr. Powell." "What are you?" He held a finger to his lips, glancing toward where Richmond stood with his back to them, still engaged in conversation. "I don't have much time. I'm here to help you if you want it." Hope flared in her eyes, quickly followed by fear. "He has papers, a contract." "He says it's legal, a contract signed under duress, for purposes that no court would uphold. But we can argue legalities later. Do you want to leave with him or come with me?" For the first time since her ordeal began, Charlotte felt a glimmer of hope. "You came all this way? For me?" Kade nodded once. "No one deserves to be sold, least of all you." Tears welled in her eyes. "He'll come after us. He paid my father, let me worry about that. Right now, I need to know, do you trust me enough to run?" Charlotte glanced toward Richmond, who was now accepting documents from the station master. Her time was running out. She looked back at Kade, at the determination in his weathered face, and made her decision. "Yes. Good. When I create a distraction, walk, don't run to the back of the station. There's a door leading to the freight yard. Wait for me there." Before she could respond, he was gone, moving purposefully toward the ticket counter. Charlotte watched as he exchanged words with the clerk, then deliberately bumped into a large man carrying a crate, causing a commotion as the contents, dozens of glass bottles, shattered on the floor. In the ensuing chaos, with all eyes drawn to the spilled liquor and angry shouts, Charlotte rose and walked as casually as she could manage toward the back of the station. Her heart hammered against her ribs, certain that at any moment Richmond would spot her and call out, but she reached the door to the freight yard without incident. The night air was cool against her flushed face as she slipped outside, finding herself among stacks of crates and barrels awaiting shipment. She pressed herself against the wall, listening to the continued commotion inside the station, praying that Kade would join her soon. Minutes stretched like hours before the door finally opened and Kade emerged, moving swiftly toward her. "Richmond," she whispered, "helping clean up the mess last I saw, but he'll notice you're gone any minute. Come on." He led her through the maze of freight, away from the station, and toward the edges of town where buildings gave way to desert. They moved quickly but carefully, avoiding the pools of light cast by the few street lamps. "I have 2 horses waiting at a livery on the edge of town," Kade explained in a hushed voice. "We'll ride south tonight, away from the railway. There are trails through the mountains where a carriage can't follow." "He'll send the law after us," Charlotte said, fear evident in her voice. "Maybe. But territorial justice moves slow, and most lawmen out here have better things to do than chase down a dispute between a city man and a cowboy. Especially once we cross into California proper." They reached the livery stable without incident. The sleepy stable hand barely looked up as Kade collected Diablo and a sturdy mare he had purchased upon arrival. Within minutes, they were mounted and riding south into the desert night, guided by starlight. Charlotte, who had never ridden astride before, clung awkwardly to the saddle horn. Despite her discomfort, she didn't complain, too grateful for escape to worry about propriety. Once they were well away from town, Kade slowed their pace to allow the horses to conserve energy. "We'll need to keep moving through the night," he said. "Put as much distance between us and Needles as possible before dawn. Can you manage?" Charlotte nodded, determination replacing fear in her eyes. "I'll manage. You've risked everything to help me. I won't slow us down." Kade looked at her with newfound respect. Despite everything she'd been through, her spirit remained unbroken. "Your father had no right to sell you," he said quietly. "No man has that right. Why did you come after me? We barely know each other." Kade was silent for a moment, considering. "I've seen what happens to women forced into lives like the one Richmond had planned for you. After the war, I drifted for a while, ended up in San Francisco. Places like his Gilded Rose are gilded cages. No one deserves that fate." Charlotte studied his profile in the moonlight, noting the hard lines of his face softened by something that might have been compassion. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll find a way to repay you." "No need," he replied. "Just stay alive and free, that'll be payment enough." They rode in companionable silence, the desert night alive with the sounds of creatures unseen. For the first time since her father had announced her fate, Charlotte felt something close to peace. Whatever lay ahead, at least she had chosen it freely. Edgar Richmond's rage was a cold, calculated thing. When he discovered Charlotte missing from the waiting area, he didn't shout or cause a scene. Instead, his eyes narrowed as he scanned the station, quickly identifying the tall cowboy who had orchestrated the distraction as the likely culprit. He approached the station master, his voice pleasant despite the fury simmering beneath. "That man who caused the accident, do you know him?" The station master shrugged. "Never seen him before tonight. Bought a ticket to San Francisco, though." "And did you happen to notice which way he went after the commotion?" "Back of the station, I think, toward the freight yard." Richmond nodded, a thin smile stretching his lips. "Thank you. You've been most helpful." He returned to his private waiting room, opened his valise, and removed a small writing case. Quickly, he penned 3 telegrams, one to the sheriff in Williams, one to his contact in the territorial marshal's office, and one to his associates in San Francisco. Each message was clear. A valuable indentured servant had been stolen from him, along with property worth considerable money. The law should be engaged to recover both. With the telegrams dispatched, Richmond settled back to wait for the midnight train. He had invested too much in acquiring Charlotte Hayes to simply let her go. The girl had potential rare beauty combined with an innocence that his wealthy clients would pay handsomely to despoil. Such commodities didn't come along often, and he had no intention of writing off his investment. If the cowboy thought he could simply ride off with Richmond's property, he would soon learn the harsh realities of frontier justice. Money spoke louder than moral outrage, and Richmond had plenty of money to make his voice heard. Dawn broke over the desert landscape, painting the rugged mountains in gold and crimson. Kade and Charlotte had ridden through the night, stopping only briefly to rest the horses and drink from their canteens. Now, as the first light revealed their surroundings, Kade led them toward a sheltered canyon where a small stream provided water. "We'll rest here for a few hours," he said, dismounting and helping Charlotte down from her mare. Her legs nearly buckled as they hit the ground, unused to so many hours in the saddle. Kade steadied her with strong hands on her arms. "You did well," he said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Most city folk would have been complaining hours ago." Charlotte managed a tired smile. "I'm not city folk, just a farmer's daughter," he nodded, a hint of a smile touching his normally serious face. "That you are." They made a small camp in the shelter of an overhanging rock. Kade refused to risk a fire, concerned that smoke might be spotted, so they ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water from the stream. As Charlotte ate, she studied her rescuer in the clear morning light. Kade Powell was not what most would consider a handsome man. His face was too weathered, his expressions too guarded, but there was something compelling about him. His hazel eyes missed nothing, and his movements held the easy confidence of a man accustomed to relying on his own strength and judgment. "How long will it take to reach somewhere safe?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence. Kade considered the question. "We're heading for a place called Lost Valley, small settlement about 3 days' ride from here, nestled in the mountains. Friend of mine runs a trading post there. We can rest, get supplies, then decide our next move. Will Richmond follow us that far? Depends how badly he wants you back." Kade's directness was oddly comforting after Richmond's veiled words and false smiles. "My guess is he'll try to use the law first, claim your stolen property. If that fails, he might hire men to track us." Charlotte shivered despite the growing warmth of the day. "What will we do? Stay ahead of them. Keep to trails only locals know. After Lost Valley, we'll head deeper into California, maybe toward the coast. Harder to track someone through populated areas." She nodded, then asked the question that had been troubling her since their escape. "What about after? Where will I go? I can't go home." Kade was silent for a long moment. "We'll figure that out when we're safe. For now, you should rest. We've got more hard riding ahead." Charlotte didn't argue. She settled onto the blanket Kade provided, using her carpet bag as a pillow. Despite her exhaustion and the hard ground beneath her, sleep came quickly, her body surrendering to fatigue. Kade watched her for a moment, noting the way her chestnut hair fanned out around her face, how the tension had eased from her features in sleep. Something protective stirred in his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since before the war, when he still believed in things like home and family. He pushed the feeling aside. Charlotte Hayes was his responsibility now, but only until she was safely beyond Richmond's reach. Then she would go her way, and he would return to his solitary existence. That was how it had to be. With that resolution firmly in mind, Kade settled with his back against the rock face, rifle across his knees, keeping watch while Charlotte slept. The next 2 days passed in a grueling rhythm of riding and brief rest. Charlotte's body ached from hours in the saddle, but she refused to complain. Each mile took them further from Richmond, and the fate he had planned for her. They traveled through country few white men knew well, rugged canyons and high desert plateaus where the only trails were game paths and ancient Native American routes that Kade had learned during his time as an Army scout. They saw no other travelers, which Charlotte found both reassuring and eerily isolating. During their journey, she learned pieces of Kade's story. He had fought for the Union in the war, returned home to Pennsylvania to find his family farm sold to pay debts, and drifted west seeking something he couldn't name. He had worked as a scout, a cowhand, a horse breaker, whatever honest work he could find that allowed him to keep moving. "Don't you ever want to settle somewhere?" she asked on the evening of the 3rd day, as they made camp in a protected hollow near a natural spring. Kade shrugged, busy building a small fire now that they were far enough from needles to risk it. "Never found a place worth stopping for." "No family waiting for you somewhere?" "Not anymore." His tone discouraged further questions on that subject. The fire crackled to life, casting a warm glow over their small camp. Charlotte held her hands toward the flames, grateful for the warmth as the desert night cooled rapidly. "What about you?" Kade asked unexpectedly. "Before all this happened, what did you want from life?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked about her dreams in a very long time. "I used to imagine leaving Silverwood," she admitted. "Not like this, though. I thought maybe I'd become a school teacher somewhere. I've always loved books." "You can still do that," Kade said quietly. "Once we're clear of Richmond, you can build whatever life you want." Charlotte looked up at him, firelight dancing across her features. "Because of you. You gave me back my freedom." Something flickered in Kade's eyes, discomfort with her gratitude, perhaps, and he looked away. "Freedom's not something anyone should have to be given. It's a right. Still, I owe you more than I can ever repay." "You don't owe me anything, Charlotte." The way he said her name, with a gentleness that belied his rough exterior, sent an unexpected warmth through her that had nothing to do with the fire. The moment was broken by a distant sound, the faint but unmistakable report of a rifle. Both of them tensed, Kade immediately reaching for his Winchester. "Stay here," he whispered. Moving toward the edge of their camp, Charlotte watched as he melted into the darkness, his movements silent and practiced. She sat frozen by the fire, straining to hear any further sounds, her heart pounding in her chest. Minutes stretched like hours before Kade returned, his expression grim. "Hunters, maybe, or someone tracking us. Either way, we need to move. Now." They doused the fire and packed quickly, mounting in the darkness. Kade led them deeper into the maze of canyons, following paths invisible to Charlotte's untrained eye. They rode in tense silence, both aware that they might not be alone in this wilderness. After an hour of hard riding, they reached a narrow slot canyon where the walls rose so high on either side that the stars were merely a ribbon of light overhead. Kade dismounted, helping Charlotte down. "We'll rest the horses here," he whispered. "If someone's tracking us, this is a good place to lose them. Sound echoes strangely in these canyons, makes it hard to pinpoint where it's coming from." Charlotte nodded, too tired and frightened to speak. She slid down to sit with her back against the cool canyon wall, trying to calm her racing heart. Kade crouched beside her. "We're close to Lost Valley. Half a day's ride if we push hard. Once we're there, we'll have help. You're sure your friend will take us in?" "Jim Blackwood owes me his life. He won't turn us away." Charlotte reached out impulsively, her fingers finding Kade's in the darkness. "Thank you for everything." His hand tightened briefly around hers before releasing it. "Try to rest. I'll keep watch." As Charlotte closed her eyes, exhaustion eventually overcoming fear, she realized something had changed between them during their journey. Kade was no longer just her rescuer, he had become someone she trusted completely. Someone whose presence made her feel safe in a way she had never experienced before. The thought should have frightened her, given how little she truly knew about this quiet, complicated man. Instead, it brought a strange comfort as she drifted into restless sleep. In the pre-dawn hours, they began moving again, following the winding canyon as it gradually widened. By mid-morning, they emerged onto a high plateau overlooking a verdant valley, nestled between towering mountains. Lost Valley, hidden from the world and accessible only by the difficult trails they had followed. Charlotte gasped at the unexpected beauty of it. After days in the desert, the sight of trees and flowing water seemed almost miraculous. "It's beautiful," she breathed. Kade nodded. "One of the best-kept secrets in the territory. Most folks don't even know it exists." They rode down a switchback trail into the valley, eventually reaching a clearing where a sturdy log trading post stood. Several horses were hitched outside, and smoke curled from the stone chimney. A burly man with a magnificent beard stepped onto the porch as they approached, a shotgun held casually in his hands. When he recognized Kade, his weathered face split into a grin. "Powell, you son of a gun, thought you were dead," Kade dismounted, a rare smile touching his lips. "Not yet, Jim." Though not for lack of trying. The men clasped hands warmly. Jim's sharp eyes moved to Charlotte, who remained on her horse, uncertainty written across her tired face. "And who might this young lady be?" he asked. "Charlotte Hayes. She's under my protection." Something unspoken passed between the men, and Jim nodded. "Any friend of Kade's is welcome here. Come inside, both of you. You look like you could use a hot meal and a proper rest." The interior of the trading post was surprisingly comfortable, with a large stone fireplace, sturdy wooden furniture, and shelves stocked with supplies of all kinds. Jim's wife, a handsome woman named Sarah with silver threading through her dark hair, immediately took Charlotte under her wing. "You poor dear, you look exhausted. Come with me, I'll show you where you can wash up and rest." Charlotte glanced at Kade, who nodded reassuringly. "Go on. We're safe here." Sarah led her to a small but clean room off the main trading area, where a basin of water and clean towels awaited. "You can use this room while you're here. It's not much, but it's private." "Thank you," Charlotte said sincerely. "You're very kind to take in strangers." Sarah smiled, the expression softening the lines of her face. "Kade Powell isn't a stranger. He saved Jim's life during an Apache raid 3 years back. Any friend of his is family as far as we're concerned." Once alone, Charlotte washed away the dust of travel, changed into her cleanest dress, and brushed her tangled hair. The simple actions restored some sense of normalcy, helping her feel human again after days on the run. When she returned to the main room, she found Kade and Jim deep in conversation by the fire, their voices too low for her to catch their words. They fell silent as she approached, both men rising to their feet. "Feeling better?" Kade asked, his eyes taking in her changed appearance. Charlotte nodded, suddenly self-conscious under his gaze. "Much, thank you." Sarah appeared from the kitchen area, carrying a tray laden with steaming bowls of stew and fresh bread. "Sit and eat, all of you. No serious talk until after a proper meal." The stew was the most delicious thing Charlotte had tasted in days, rich with meat and vegetables, seasoned with herbs that reminded her of her mother's cooking. She ate hungrily, realizing only then how inadequate their trail rations had been. After the meal, Jim poured coffee for the adults and settled back in his chair. "So Kade tells me you've got trouble on your trail." Charlotte looked to Kade, unsure how much he had shared. He nodded encouragingly. "My father sold me to a man named Richmond," she said, the words still painful to speak aloud. "He runs a house of ill repute in San Francisco. Kade helped me escape before we reached California." Jim whistled low. "Selling your own flesh and blood, that's a special kind of sin." "Richmond won't give up easily," Kade added. "He's likely contacted the law by now, claiming she's stolen property." "Can he really do that?" Sarah asked, horrified. "Surely no court would uphold such a contract." "Depends on the judge," Jim said grimly. "Some care more about the letter of the law than the spirit. Indenture contracts can be mighty binding, especially in the territories." Charlotte felt the hope that had been building since their arrival begin to fade. "So I'll never be truly free. He can hunt me forever." "No," Kade said firmly. "There are ways to fight this legally. But first, we need to get you somewhere Richmond can't reach you." Jim stroked his beard thoughtfully. "I might have a solution. My brother runs a ranch near Monterey. Good man, God-fearing. He and his wife never had children of their own. They could use help and they'd provide protection." "Monterey," Charlotte repeated. "That's still in California." "Northern California," Jim corrected. "Different world from San Francisco." And my brother has connections with the local judge, honest man who wouldn't uphold a contract meant for immoral purposes. Kade considered this, then nodded slowly. It could work. If Charlotte had a legitimate position and the protection of a respected family, it would be harder for Richmond to press his claim. Charlotte looked between them, a new worry forming. "And you? Would you come to Monterey too?" A shadow passed over Kade's face. "I need to make sure Richmond isn't following us. Once I'm certain you're safe at the ranch, I'll move on." The thought of Kade leaving sent an unexpected pang through Charlotte's heart. In the short time they'd been together, he had become her anchor in a world turned upside down. The prospect of facing yet another unknown future without him was more frightening than she wanted to admit. "When do we leave?" she asked instead, keeping her voice steady. "Rest today and tonight," Jim advised. "I'll have fresh horses ready for you tomorrow. There's a wagon train heading west in 3 days. You can join them for safer passage." The decision made, Charlotte excused herself and returned to her room. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed, emotions she couldn't name washing over her. She was grateful for the Blackwood's kindness and the prospect of safety in Monterey, but the thought of Kade riding away, possibly into danger, left her feeling hollow. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called, expecting Sarah with fresh linens or water. Instead, it was Kade who entered, hesitating at the threshold as if uncertain of his welcome. "I wanted to make sure you were all right with the plan," he said. "Monterey is a good place. Jim's brother is a decent man." Charlotte nodded. "I'm grateful. It's more than I could have hoped for." Kade studied her face. But I'm afraid," she admitted, "of being alone again, of Richmond finding me, of—" She trailed off, unwilling to voice her fear of Kade's departure. He moved further into the room, sitting beside her on the bed, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You won't be alone. The Blackwoods will look after you. It's not the same." She gathered her courage. "These past days, despite the danger, despite everything, I haven't felt so seen in years, not since my mother died." Kade was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was low, almost rough. "I'm not good company, Charlotte. I've been alone a long time. It's better that way." "Better for whom?" He looked away. "There are things in my past choices I've made, things I've done. A decent woman like you deserves better." Charlotte surprised them both by reaching for his hand. "I think I should be the judge of what I deserve." His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment, she glimpsed vulnerability beneath his guarded exterior, a loneliness that mirrored her own. Then he gently withdrew his hand and stood. "Get some rest," he said softly. "We have a long journey ahead." After he left, Charlotte lay back on the bed, staring at the rough-hewn ceiling beams. For the first time since her escape, her thoughts were not dominated by fear of Richmond or uncertainty about her future. Instead, she found herself wondering about the man who had risked everything to save her, and whether she could find a way to save him in return. From the solitude he seemed determined to maintain. Their departure from Lost Valley the next morning was bittersweet. The Blackwoods provided them with fresh horses, ample supplies, and directions to the meeting point for the wagon train. Sarah pressed a bundle of clothing into Charlotte's hands, simple, practical garments that would serve her better on the journey than her few worn dresses. "Be careful out there," Jim warned as they mounted their horses. "I've sent word to my brother to expect you, but it's still dangerous country between here and Monterey." Kade clasped the older man's hand. "We'll be fine. Thank you, Jim, for everything. Just don't be a stranger, Powell. Next time, come visit when you're not running from trouble." They rode west out of the valley, following a trail that would eventually connect with the wagon road to California. The day was clear, the air cooler at this elevation, making for pleasant traveling conditions. Charlotte found herself oddly content despite the circumstances, watching the play of sunlight through the pines and listening to the call of birds overhead. "It's peaceful here," she remarked as they stopped to water the horses at a small stream. "I can see why people would want to stay." Kade nodded, scanning the horizon with habitual vigilance. "The territory has its beauty if you know where to look." "Is that why you've stayed in the West? For its beauty?" he considered the question. "Partly. It's also one of the few places where a man can reinvent himself." "Leave the past behind." "Is that what you're doing? Leaving your past behind?" His expression closed off slightly. "We should keep moving. Want to reach the foothills by nightfall." Charlotte recognized the deflection but didn't press. Instead, she mounted her horse and followed as Kade led them back to the trail, winding its way through forests that gradually gave way to more open country. By late afternoon, they had descended into a broad valley where they could see the wagon road in the distance, a pale line cutting across the landscape. Kade reined in his horse, surveying the terrain ahead. "We'll camp in those trees tonight," he decided, pointing to a copse near the road. "Join the wagon train tomorrow when they pass." Their camp that evening was more comfortable than those of previous nights. With supplies from the trading post, they enjoyed a proper meal cooked over a small fire. Charlotte found herself watching Kade as he moved about the camp, noting the grace in his weathered hands as he cared for the horses, the vigilant way he constantly scanned their surroundings. After they had eaten, she gathered her courage. "Will you tell me about your life before?" "Before the West, I mean." Kade was silent for so long that she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, unexpectedly, he began to speak, his voice low against the backdrop of cricket song and distant coyote calls. "I grew up in Pennsylvania. Small farm, not much different from yours probably. Parents, 3 sisters. I was the only boy, so the farm was meant to be mine someday." He paused, staring into the fire. "Then the war came. I was 18, full of ideas about duty and honor, enlisted with the Union Army." "Your family supported that," "My father did." Mother cried for days. A ghost of a smile touched his lips, "Promised her I'd come home a hero." "And did you?" Charlotte asked softly. The smile faded. "Came home a different man than the one who left, saw things, did things. War changes you." "When I finally made it back to Pennsylvania in '65, everything had changed there too. Father had died. Mother was struggling to keep the farm going with my sisters. There were debts." Charlotte waited, sensing there was more to the story. "I tried to help, took odd jobs in town, but I couldn't. Couldn't settle, nightmares. Couldn't stand being indoors for too long. One day I just walked away. Sent most of my earnings home, but I never went back. Eventually, Mother wrote that they'd sold the farm, moved in with my aunt in Philadelphia. After that, I stopped heading east altogether." "Your sisters, do you still write to them?" "Sometimes. They have their own lives now, husbands, children, better that way." Charlotte studied his profile in the firelight. "Do you really believe that it's better to be alone?" Kade looked up, meeting her gaze directly. "It's simpler. Fewer people to disappoint, fewer to lose. And fewer to love," she said quietly. Something flickered in his eyes, a brief vulnerability quickly masked. "Get some rest, Charlotte. Tomorrow will be a long day." She wanted to say more, to challenge his isolation, but she recognized the walls he had erected around himself. Instead, she bid him good night and settled into her bedroll, listening to the night sounds and wondering if Kade Powell would ever allow anyone close enough to truly know him. The wagon train they joined the next day consisted of 12 wagons, mostly families heading to California in search of better opportunities. The wagon master, a grizzled veteran named Hanson, welcomed them readily enough after Kade explained they were traveling to join family in Monterey. "Extra guns are always welcome," Hanson said, eyeing Kade's Winchester and revolver. "We've had reports of bandits in the passes ahead." For Charlotte, traveling with the wagon train was a welcome change. There were women to talk to, children whose laughter lightened the journey, a sense of community that had been absent from her life since her mother's death. She found herself helping with cooking and looking after the younger children, falling easily into rhythms that felt both new and familiar. Kade kept more to himself, riding scout alongside Hanson's regular men, often disappearing for hours to check the trail ahead before rejoining the train. Charlotte noticed how the other travelers regarded him with a mixture of respect and wariness, the same way people in Silverwood had always viewed him. A necessary man, but not one you invited to dinner. On the third night with the wagon train, as they camped in a sheltered valley, one of the women, Mary Colton, sat beside Charlotte by the communal fire. "Your husband doesn't say much," she observed, nodding toward where Kade stood at the perimeter of the camp, talking quietly with Hanson. Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Oh, Mr. Powell isn't my husband. He's escorting me to my relatives in Monterey." Mary raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? Well, he watches you like a husband, or a man who wishes to be one." "I don't think," Charlotte began, then stopped, unsure how to continue. She hadn't noticed Kade watching her particularly, but then again, she'd been busy with the children and women for much of the journey. "Take it from someone who's been married 15 years, Mary said with a knowing smile. "That man cares for you, whether he admits it or not. And judging by how you look at him when you think no one's watching, the feeling's mutual." Before Charlotte could formulate a response, shouts erupted from the far side of the camp. Kade was running toward Hanson, who was already calling for men to arm themselves. "Riders coming, at least 8 of them," someone called. The camp erupted into controlled chaos. Women gathered children into the wagons, men grabbed rifles, and the wagon master directed several youths to round up the stock and bring them closer to the circle of wagons. Kade appeared at Charlotte's side, his expression grim. "Get in one of the wagons. Stay down." "What's happening?" "Could be nothing. Could be trouble. Either way, I want you out of sight." The urgency in his voice brooked no argument. Charlotte quickly joined Mary and her children in their wagon, peering through a gap in the canvas as riders approached the camp. From her limited vantage point, she counted 7 men, all armed, their faces obscured by the gathering dusk. Their leader, a tall man with a distinctive silver-trimmed hat, reined in his horse and called out to Hanson. Though she couldn't make out their words clearly, the tension in the air was palpable. The wagon creaked as Mary's husband, Thomas, climbed up beside them, rifle in hand. "Saying they're looking for a man and woman," he whispered. "Claimed the woman was kidnapped, offering a reward for information." Charlotte's blood ran cold. Richmond must have hired these men to track them down. She pressed further back into the shadows of the wagon, heart hammering in her chest. "Hanson won't turn them in," Mary whispered reassuringly, drawing her children closer. "He doesn't abide by bounty hunters." Tense minutes passed. Charlotte strained to hear what was being said, catching only fragments of conversation. Then, suddenly, a shot rang out, followed by shouts and more gunfire. "Stay down," Thomas ordered, raising his rifle and firing toward the intruders. Charlotte huddled with Mary and the children as the night erupted into violence. The gunfight was brief, but intense. When it ended, she heard Hanson calling for the women to bring bandages and water. There were wounded. Unable to remain hidden when she might be needed, Charlotte slipped from the wagon despite Mary's protests. The scene that greeted her was chaotic. 2 of the attackers lay motionless on the ground while a third was being restrained. The others had apparently fled. Several of the wagon train men were injured, though none appeared life-threatening. Her eyes searched frantically for Kade, finally locating him helping an older man to a sitting position near the fire. Relief flooded through her at the sight of him unharmed. As she moved to join the women tending the wounded, a hand suddenly clamped around her arm. She turned to find herself face to face with the silver-hatted leader of the attackers, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead, a knife pressed to her side. "Found you, Miss Hayes," he growled, his breath hot against her ear. "Mr. Richmond sends his regards." Before she could scream, he began dragging her backward toward the darkness beyond the wagons. Terror paralyzed her vocal cords as she struggled against his iron grip. Then, from the corner of her eye, she saw Kade. He had spotted them and was moving with deadly purpose, his revolver drawn. "Let her go," he commanded, his voice carrying across the camp. The bounty hunter laughed, pressing the knife more firmly against Charlotte's ribs. "Back off, Cowboy. This one's worth $1,000 to me alive. Don't much care about you either way." "One last chance," Kade warned, still advancing slowly. "Release her. Or what? You'll shoot. Might hit the girl." What happened next occurred so quickly that Charlotte would later struggle to recall the sequence. Kade fired, the bullet passing so close to her ear that she felt its heat. The bounty hunter's grip slackened as he staggered backward, blood blooming on his shoulder. Before he could recover, Kade was upon him, driving him to the ground with a savage blow. Charlotte stumbled away, watching in shock as Kade subdued the larger man with brutal efficiency. When it was done, the bounty hunter lay unconscious, and Kade stood over him, breathing hard, a dangerous light in his eyes that she had never seen before. Hansen and several others rushed over, securing the bounty hunter with rope. Kade turned to Charlotte, the fierce expression softening as he took in her pale face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle despite the violence he had just enacted. She shook her head, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Without thinking, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, burying her face against his chest. After a moment's hesitation, his arms encircled her, holding her steady as delayed shock set in and she began to tremble. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "You're safe now." Only later, after the wounded had been tended and the captured bounty hunters secured, did Charlotte learn the full story. The men had been hired by Richmond to track them down, with orders to bring her back alive and deal with Kade however they saw fit. They had been following the wagon train for 2 days, waiting for an opportunity to strike. "We can't stay with the train," Kade told her that night as they sat apart from the others. "Too dangerous for everyone. Those men who escaped will likely bring reinforcements. Where will we go?" Charlotte asked, still shaken by the close call. "There's a small settlement about a day's ride southwest of here. We can rest there, then continue to Monterey on our own. It's risky, but less so than endangering these families." Hansen agreed with Kade's assessment. At first light, they bid farewell to the wagon train, with promises from Hansen to spread false information about their destination if questioned. As they rode away, Charlotte glanced back at the wagons growing smaller in the distance. "Those people risked their lives for us. For me. They didn't even know me." "Good people still exist in this world," Kade said simply. "Worth remembering that. They traveled hard that day, avoiding the main trails and keeping to rougher country where pursuit would be difficult." By nightfall, they reached the settlement Kade had mentioned, little more than a trading post, a saloon, and a handful of rough cabins clustered around a spring. The saloon owner's wife, a practical woman named Etta, offered them a small room above the saloon for the night. "Not much, but it's clean," she assured Charlotte. "My husband and his shotgun ensure no one bothers our guests." For the first time in days, Charlotte was able to bathe properly and sleep in a real bed, albeit a narrow one that creaked with every movement. The simple luxuries, soap, clean sheets, a roof overhead felt like extravagant indulgences after their time on the trail. Kade took a room across the hall, though Charlotte suspected he spent most of the night keeping watch rather than sleeping. When she joined him for breakfast in the saloon's small dining area the next morning, the shadows beneath his eyes confirmed her suspicion. "You need to rest," she chided gently. "You can't protect either of us if you collapse from exhaustion." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've gone longer without sleep. We'll be safe once we reach Monterey." "And then?" she asked, the question that had been hovering between them finally spoken aloud. Cade's eyes met hers across the table. For a moment, something unguarded and almost yearning showed in his gaze. Then he looked down at his coffee. "Then you'll be with Jim's family, safe, free to build the life you want." "That's not what I asked," Charlotte said softly. Before he could respond, the door to the saloon burst open. A young boy stood there, breathless. "Riders coming, lots of 'em." Kade was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. "How many?" "Least a dozen," the boy reported. "All armed, bad-looking men." Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. Richmond must have hired more bounty hunters, or these were the same ones, now reinforced with additional men. Kade turned to her, decision made. "We need to leave. Now." They gathered their few belongings and hurried to the stables where their horses were kept. The settlement was already in motion, men positioning themselves at windows and doors, women ushering children indoors. "These people shouldn't have to fight our battle," Charlotte said as Kade saddled their horses with swift efficiency. "They won't have to. We'll be gone before those riders arrive." He helped her mount, then swung up onto his own horse. "There's a back trail through the hills. Rough going, but it'll keep us ahead of them." They rode out of the settlement as the approaching riders appeared on the horizon, nothing more than distant specks of dust. Kade led them up a narrow, rocky path that switchbacked into the hills behind the trading post. The trail was indeed rough, barely more than a game path in places, forcing them to dismount and lead the horses over the most treacherous sections. By midday, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley they had left. Charlotte could make out riders scattered across the landscape below, clearly searching for their trail. "They're persistent," she observed, a tremor in her voice betraying her fear. Kade nodded grimly. "Richmond must want you back badly to spend this kind of money. Or he wants to make an example of me, to show what happens to property that tries to escape." Cade's jaw tightened. "He won't get the chance." They continued their ascent, the trail growing steeper and narrower. By late afternoon, they had reached a high pass where the wind blew cold despite the summer season. Charlotte's mare stumbled on the rocky ground, nearly sending her over a precipice. Only Cade's quick reflexes saved her, his hand shooting out to grab her arm and pull her to safety. The near fall left her shaken. When Kade suggested they make camp in a sheltered hollow just beyond the pass, she agreed readily, her legs trembling with fatigue and lingering fear. The hollow offered good protection from the wind and was concealed from the trail by a stand of stunted pines. Kade refused to risk a fire, so they ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water from a nearby spring. As darkness fell, bringing with it a bone-deep chill, Charlotte huddled in her blanket, unable to stop shivering. Kade watched her with concern for several minutes before wordlessly moving to sit beside her, offering his own blanket as additional warmth. "You'll be cold," she protested. "I'm used to it." She hesitated, then made a decision. "We could share the blankets, I mean. It would be warmer for both of us." In the dim starlight, she couldn't read his expression clearly, but she felt the tension in his body. "That wouldn't be proper," he said finally. "Neither is freezing to death," Charlotte countered with unexpected spirit. "And I think we're well beyond conventional propriety at this point, don't you?" After a moment's hesitation, Kade nodded. They arranged their bedrolls side by side and lay down together, blankets spread over both of them. Charlotte's back pressed against Cade's chest, his arm draped carefully over her waist close enough for warmth, but with a deliberate space maintained between them. Despite the awkwardness of the situation, the shared warmth was undeniably effective. Charlotte's shivering gradually subsided, replaced by a different kind of awareness of Cade's steady breathing, the solid strength of him behind her, the faint scent of leather and pine that seemed to cling to his clothes. "Thank you," she said softly into the darkness. "Not just for the warmth. For everything. For risking your life for a stranger." "You're not a stranger anymore," he replied, his voice a low rumble she could feel against her back. Charlotte smiled, though he couldn't see it. "No, I suppose I'm not, though there's still so much I don't know about you." "What do you want to know?" The question surprised her. It was the first time he had invited her questions rather than deflecting them. "Why did you really come after me? The truth." Kade was silent for so long that she thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft but clear in the stillness of the night. "I saw your father selling you. Was in town that day, saw Richmond talking to Vernon, saw the money change hands. It didn't sit right, but I told myself it wasn't my business." He paused. "Then I saw you in that carriage the next morning, the look on your face. I knew what Richmond was, what he intended, and I couldn't just let it happen, not again." "Again?" Charlotte asked gently, another long silence. "Had a sister. Youngest of the three, Claire. After I left home, she followed wanted adventure," she said. "I was working in Denver then. She fell in with bad people while I was away on a cattle drive. By the time I got back, she was working in a house much like the one Richmond runs. I tried to get her out, but—" His voice caught. "She didn't want saving by then, or couldn't see a way back. Died of fever 2 years later." Charlotte's heart ached for the pain she heard in his voice. She reached for his hand where it rested at her waist, threading her fingers through his. "I'm sorry. When I saw you in that carriage, I saw Claire. Couldn't fail another young woman the way I failed her." "You didn't fail me," Charlotte whispered. "You saved me." His arm tightened slightly around her, an unconscious gesture of protection. "Not home free yet, but we will be, I believe that." She squeezed his hand. "And Kade, you didn't fail Claire either. Some choices aren't ours to make, no matter how much we love someone." He didn't respond, but something in his breathing changed, became less measured, more ragged, and Charlotte realized with a shock that Kade Powell, this strong, stoic man who had faced down killers without flinching, was silently weeping. She held his hand more firmly, offering wordless comfort, and eventually felt him relax into sleep, his breathing once again steady and deep. As she drifted towards sleep herself, Charlotte realized that something fundamental had shifted between them. In sharing his deepest pain, Kade had crossed a boundary, had allowed her to see not just the capable protector, but the vulnerable man beneath. And in doing so, he had confirmed what her heart had already begun to suspect, that what she felt for him was no mere gratitude, but something deeper and more profound. Morning brought renewed clarity and purpose. They set out at first light, Kade leading them through terrain so rugged that Charlotte marveled at his ability to find a passable route. By midday, they had descended into more hospitable country, a valley of rolling hills and scattered oaks that Kade said marked the approach to lands more regularly settled. "We're entering California proper now," he told her as they paused to rest the horses. "Another 3 days' ride to Monterey, if we push hard." Charlotte studied his face in the clear daylight, noting how the shadows beneath his eyes had lightened somewhat after a night's proper rest. Something had changed in him since their conversation in the darkness, a weight lifted, perhaps, or a decision made. "You think they're still following?" she asked, glancing back the way they had come. "Probably. But we've bought time and distance. And we're entering more settled country now, harder for them to act with impunity." They mounted again, riding side by side where the trail permitted. As they traveled, Charlotte found herself watching Kade with new eyes, noting details she had somehow missed before, the way humor sometimes touched his eyes even when his mouth remained serious, the gentleness of his hands when he cared for the horses, the quiet competence with which he navigated their journey. By evening, they reached a small town where they were able to secure separate rooms at a modest hotel. The luxury of a hot bath and a proper bed was almost overwhelming after days on the trail. Charlotte soaked until the water cooled, washing away the dust and strain of their flight. When she joined Kade for supper in the hotel's dining room, wearing a clean dress provided by the hotel owner's wife, she was struck by how he had transformed himself as well. He had shaved and changed into a clean shirt, his dark hair still damp from washing. In these more civilized surroundings, he looked less like a frontier scout and more like the gentleman he might have become under different circumstances. "You look beautiful," he said simply as she sat across from him, the words clearly surprising him as much as her. Charlotte felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you. You look quite handsome yourself." Something flickered in his eyes, uncertainty, perhaps, or a hope he was afraid to acknowledge. They ate their meal in a comfortable silence broken only by occasional conversation about their route for the next day. It was only as they were finishing their coffee that Kade spoke of what lay ahead. "Once we reach Monterey, you'll be safe with Jim's brother. His ranch is well established. You can start a new life there." Charlotte set down her cup. "And what about you?" Kade studied the tablecloth. "I'll make sure you're settled, then move on." "Is that what you want?" she asked directly. He looked up, meeting her gaze. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is your safety, your future." "It matters to me." Charlotte gathered her courage. "Last night, what you shared with me, it made me realize something. I don't want you to leave, Kade, not unless it's truly what you want." Surprise, followed by something like hope, flashed across his face before he could mask it. "Charlotte, I'm not. I don't have anything to offer a woman like you. No home, no prospects. You offered me my freedom, my life. Those seem like significant gifts." She reached across the table, tentatively touching his hand. "And perhaps there could be more, if you wanted it." Kade stared at her hand on his, conflict evident in his expression. "You're young. You've been through a terrible ordeal. What you're feeling, it might just be gratitude." "Is that what you tell yourself? That what you feel for me is just protective instinct, obligation?" She withdrew her hand slowly. "Because I know my own heart, Kade Powell, and gratitude is only a small part of what I feel for you." Before he could respond, the hotel owner approached their table. "Mr. Powell, there's a gentleman asking after you and the young lady, says he's an old friend." Kade was instantly alert, one hand moving to the gun at his hip. "Did he give a name?" Called himself Edgar Richmond. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. Kade rose immediately, his expression grim. "Where is he now?" "In the front parlor. Seems a respectable sort. Keep him there. We'll leave through the kitchen." Kade turned to Charlotte. "Go to your room quickly. Get only what's essential. Meet me at the stables in 5 minutes." Heart pounding, Charlotte hurried to comply. She gathered her few possessions into her bag, hands trembling with renewed fear. How had Richmond found them so quickly? And why was he here himself, rather than sending his hired men? She met Kade at the stables as arranged. He had already saddled their horses and was checking his weapons with swift efficiency. "How did he find us?" she whispered as Kade helped her mount. "Someone must have recognized us, sent word ahead." His face was set in hard lines. "We'll head northwest, away from the coast. There's another route to Monterey through the mountains." They rode out of town by a back road, pushing the horses to a canter once they were clear of the buildings. Charlotte glanced back once, half expecting to see pursuit, but the road behind them remained empty. As they rode through the gathering darkness, a new fear took root alongside her terror of Richmond. For the first time, she truly understood the danger Kade had placed himself in by helping her. Richmond was a wealthy, connected man with resources at his disposal. If he caught them, Charlotte might face a life of degradation and captivity, but Kade would likely face death. The thought was unbearable. This man who had already sacrificed so much, his solitude, his safety, perhaps even his future, deserved better than to die for her sake. If it came to a choice between surrendering to Richmond or watching Kade die trying to protect her, Charlotte knew with sudden clarity which she would choose. They rode hard for several hours before Kade finally called a halt in a small, protected hollow similar to where they had sheltered the previous night. The horses were exhausted, their flanks heaving, and Charlotte herself felt bone-weary, the brief comfort of the hotel now a distant memory. As they made their sparse camp, Kade seemed preoccupied, his movements automatic as he cared for the horses and laid out their bedrolls. Charlotte watched him, reading the tension in the set of his shoulders, the grim line of his mouth. "It's not your fault," she said finally, breaking the silence. "Richmond finding us. You've done everything possible to keep me safe." Kade looked up, his expression softening slightly. "I should have been more careful in town, should have known he might have contacts there. You can't predict everything." She moved closer, resting a hand on his arm. "And you can't keep running with me forever. It's not fair to you." His brow furrowed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I'm afraid for you, Kade. Richmond won't stop. He'll keep coming until he finds us, and when he does—" She couldn't finish the thought. Kade covered her hand with his own. "I won't let him take you back, not ever. Even if it costs your life." His answer was immediate and certain. "Yes." Charlotte's heart seemed to expand in her chest, filled with a mixture of fear and something else, something warm and overwhelming. "Why?" she whispered. "Why risk everything for me?" Kade's eyes held hers, all his careful guards finally lowered. "Because somewhere between Silverwood and here, I stopped seeing you as someone to save. Started seeing you as someone I couldn't bear to lose." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and honest. Charlotte stepped closer, her hand moving from his arm to his face, tracing the strong line of his jaw. "I feel the same," she said softly. "And that's why I couldn't bear it if something happened to you because of me." For a long moment they stood thus, the night air electric with unspoken feelings. Then, slowly, as if giving her every opportunity to pull away, Kade lowered his head and kissed her. It was a gentle kiss, almost hesitant, the kiss of a man who had forgotten what tenderness felt like. Charlotte responded with the innocent passion of a woman discovering love for the first time, her arms winding around his neck as she pressed closer. When they finally parted, both breathless, Kade rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that since Lost Valley," he admitted. Charlotte smiled, a new confidence in her voice. "What took you so long, Cowboy?" His laugh was quiet but genuine, perhaps the first true laugh she had heard from him. "Trying to be honorable, I suppose." "Honor is admirable," she acknowledged, her fingers playing with the hair at the nape of his neck. "But sometimes a woman appreciates a little boldness too." The spark of humor in his eyes kindled into something warmer. "I'll remember that." Their second kiss was less tentative. a deeper exploration of the feelings that had been building between them. Charlotte gave herself to it completely, all thoughts of Richmond and danger temporarily banished by the joy of being in Kade's arms. When they finally settled for the night, they arranged their bedrolls together without discussion, sharing warmth and comfort in the wilderness. Charlotte lay with her head on Kade's chest, listening to his steady heartbeat, his arm wrapped protectively around her. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "After Monterey, I mean." Kade's hand stroked her hair gently. "That depends on what you want, Charlotte." She tilted her head to look up at him. "I want a future, one that includes you. Even knowing I have little to offer, no home, no fortune, you have yourself. Your strength, your honor, your heart, that's worth more than gold to me." He was quiet for a moment, considering. "Jim's brother has offered me work before, training horses. I turned him down, always moving on instead. But maybe this time I could stay if you wanted that." Charlotte's heart swelled with hope. "I'd like that very much. It wouldn't be easy. We'd have to build from nothing. I'm not afraid of hard work, and we wouldn't be starting from nothing." She placed her hand over his heart. "We'd be starting from here." Kade covered her hand with his own. "Then that's what we'll do. Once we reach Monterey safely." As they drifted toward sleep, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the vast canopy of stars, Charlotte felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. Richmond still pursued them, and the journey to Monterey remained dangerous. But tonight, in this moment, she had found something she had thought forever lost, a sense of belonging, of home. The final days of their journey passed with a new sense of purpose. They traveled carefully, avoiding towns where Richmond might have contacts, taking the less traveled mountain routes that Kade knew from his years of wandering. The terrain was challenging, but beautiful high meadows filled with wildflowers, forests of towering redwoods, valleys that opened suddenly to reveal breathtaking vistas. Charlotte found herself storing these sights in her memory, treasures to revisit in years to come. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future beyond survival, a home with Kade, perhaps children someday, a life built on the love that had grown between them through adversity. Kade, too, seemed transformed. Though still vigilant, always watching for signs of pursuit, there was a new lightness to him. He spoke more freely of his past, sharing stories of his childhood in Pennsylvania, his sisters, his mother's garden. In turn, Charlotte told him of her own childhood, of her mother's kindness and strength, of the dreams she had harbored before grief and hardship had narrowed her world. On the morning of what Kade estimated would be their final day of travel, they paused at the crest of a hill that offered their first glimpse of the Pacific Ocean, a vast blue expanse glittering in the distance. "It's beautiful," Charlotte breathed, awed by the sight. Kade nodded, a rare smile touching his lips. "Worth the journey." They descended toward the coastal plain, following a trail that wound through rolling hills dotted with oaks. By mid-afternoon, they could see the town of Monterey spread along the bay, white buildings gleaming in the sunlight. "Jim's brother's ranch is north of town," Kade explained as they rode. "We'll reach it before sunset." The ranch, when they arrived, was everything Jim had described: a substantial property with well-maintained buildings, fertile fields, and fine horses in the corrals. Robert Blackwood, a bearded man with the same forthright manner as his brother, welcomed them warmly. "Jim sent word you might be coming," he said, leading them into a comfortable farmhouse where his wife, Ellen, greeted them with equal hospitality. "Said you were in some trouble. Didn't give details, but Jim's word is good enough for me." Over a hearty supper, Kade explained their situation in careful terms, omitting the more harrowing details but making it clear that Richmond posed a genuine threat. Robert listened gravely, his wife's expression growing increasingly outraged as the story unfolded. "Selling his own daughter," Ellen said, shaking her head. "Some men don't deserve to be fathers." "And this Richmond thinks he can just claim her as property?" Robert asked. "Even here in California?" Kade nodded. "He has a contract of indenture, legally questionable given the circumstances, but he has money and connections." Robert's jaw set in a determined line. "Well, he'll find things work differently here. Judge Wilson's an old friend, and he has no patience for men who traffic in women, contract or no. As for you both, you're welcome to stay as long as needed. We can use the help, and there's a small cabin on the property that would suit a young couple starting out." Charlotte felt a wave of relief so profound, it brought tears to her eyes. After weeks of fear and uncertainty, the prospect of safety, of a home, of a future with Kade seemed almost too much to hope for. That night, they were given separate rooms in the main house, a return to propriety that both respected and amused them after their nights together under the stars. As Charlotte settled into the comfortable bed, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the coastal night, she allowed herself to truly believe, for the first time, that they had escaped Richmond's reach. The following week passed in a blur of new experiences and cautious happiness. Robert introduced Kade to Judge Wilson, who listened to their story with growing indignation and assured them that no court in his jurisdiction would enforce Richmond's contract, especially given its intended purpose. "Let him come," the judge declared firmly. "I'll have him arrested for trafficking if he shows his face in Monterey." With that assurance, Charlotte and Kade began to settle into life at the ranch. Kade worked with Robert training horses, his natural skill with the animals quickly proving valuable. Charlotte helped Ellen with household management and began teaching the Blackwood's youngest ranch hands to read and write in the evenings, a small step toward her dream of becoming a teacher. The small cabin Robert had mentioned became their project in the hours after daily work was done. It had been used as storage for years, but with effort, it was gradually transformed into a cozy home. Robert provided basic furniture, Ellen contributed linens and kitchen essentials, and Charlotte added small touches that made the space feel truly theirs. 2 weeks after their arrival, with the cabin nearly ready for occupation, Robert suggested they formalize their relationship. "Pastor Wilson, the judge's brother, comes through next Sunday," he said casually over breakfast. "Could perform a ceremony if you were of a mind." Charlotte and Kade exchanged glances, a silent communication passing between them. "We'd be honored," Kade said finally, his eyes never leaving Charlotte's face. "If Charlotte agrees." Her answer was a radiant smile that needed no words to accompany it. The wedding was simple but meaningful, held in the Blackwoods' front parlor with the family and a few ranch hands as witnesses. Charlotte wore a blue dress Ellen had helped her make, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Kade, clean-shaven and solemn in his best shirt, looked at her as if she were the most precious thing he had ever beheld. "I take you, Charlotte Hayes, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he vowed, his deep voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold, from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, until death do us part." As Charlotte repeated the vows, her heart so full it seemed it might burst, she marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperate terror of being sold by her father to the joy of freely giving herself to the man she loved, it seemed almost impossible that such transformation could occur in the span of mere months. That night, in the privacy of their newly finished cabin, they came together as husband and wife, their lovemaking a tender exploration that left them both breathless with wonder. Afterward, Lying in each other's arms, Charlotte traced lazy patterns on Kade's chest. "Happy?" he asked softly, his hand stroking her hair. "More than I knew was possible," she answered truthfully. "Are you?" His kiss was answer enough, but he added words as well. "I never thought I'd have this. A home. Someone to share it with, after the war, after Claire. I thought that part of life was closed to me. And now I'm looking forward to tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that." They settled into the rhythms of ranch life with surprising ease. Charlotte's small school grew from the ranch hands to include children from neighboring properties. Kade's reputation as a horse trainer spread, bringing additional income and respect. They planted a garden beside their cabin, made plans to expand the structure as their family grew, saved for land of their own someday. Summer turned to autumn, autumn to winter, and still there was no sign of Richmond. Gradually, the fear that had shadowed their first weeks in Monterey began to fade, replaced by a cautious belief that perhaps he had given up the chase, unwilling to challenge the local authorities or risk exposure of his true business. On a crisp morning in early spring, nearly a year after their escape, Charlotte woke with a sudden certainty. She watched Kade as he dressed for the day, admiring the lean strength of him, the way the rising sun gilded his features. "I have something to tell you," she said when he turned to her, his expression softening as it always did when he looked at her. "What is it?" She took his hand, guiding it to rest against her stomach. "We're going to have a child." The joy that transformed his face was everything she could have hoped for. He gathered her into his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass, whispering words of love and wonder against her hair. Later that day, as they shared their news with the Blackwoods, Charlotte found herself thinking of her father. Despite everything, she hoped he had found some peace, some escape from the despair that had driven him to sell his only child. Perhaps someday, when their own child was born, she might even find it in her heart to write to him, to let him know that the terrible choice he had made had, by some miracle of fate and courage, led her to happiness after all. As for Richmond, they would remain vigilant, would never take their safety entirely for granted, but they would not allow fear to overshadow the joy of the life they were building. Whatever came, they would face it together, stronger for the trials they had already endured. That evening, standing in the doorway of their cabin, Kade's arms wrapped around her from behind, his hands resting protectively over the place where their child grew, Charlotte watched the sun set over the Pacific. The beauty of it, the vast horizon, the promise of tomorrows stretching into a future bright with possibility, filled her with a peace she had once thought forever lost. "No regrets," Kade murmured against her ear, a question he still sometimes asked, as if amazed by his good fortune. Charlotte turned in his arms, raising her face to his. "None," she answered truthfully. "Every step of the journey brought me here to you. How could I regret that?" His kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise renewed with each passing day. As twilight deepened around them, they remained in each other's arms, two souls who had found in each other not just rescue, but redemption, not just escape,